I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along. I see my colleagues, Yusuf Mjini and Yoji Senna are here. Other colleagues standing by for later in the program, W.D. Foster Graham, and a new friend that we'll introduce you when we talk about a book, an author, at the end of the program today. Well, before we begin, I want to take the time to invite you to support this work, this conversation, by going to the YouTube Insight channel. And there, we want you to subscribe, to like, and to share. We're using a variety of platforms for the program, not only YouTube, but Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. But to get the count the way we want the count, we want to focus our energy on our Insight YouTube channel. Therefore, I'm asking you to take a minute and go to YouTube Insight News channel, find, like, subscribe to The Conversation with Al McFarlane. Help us grow. Like I've been saying, we're in the low hundreds right now. We want to hit that 1,000 subscriber barrier, and we can do that with your help. Each one of you, one by one, and with friends. Tell somebody we're talking, and what we're going to be having is what I call robust conversations. Well, today, I think we were going to change our schedule around a little bit, but I think we'll go with the original plan to talk. Our hot topic, the first hot topic, is around Kevin Hart. There's a story in the Grio from indicating that Kevin Hart, who was supposed to talk at or to do a show in Cairo, Egypt last week, 2 weeks ago, that show was canceled because of comments he made that created controversy there. The comment, he said, we have to think about, Black history, Black culture, and that his quote was, we have to teach our children the true history of Black Africans when they were kings in Egypt, and not just in the era of slavery that is cemented by education in America. And Kevin asked, do you remember the time when we were kings? Well, that's resonating with us here in the country right now, and probably with Black people around the world, African people. But there is pushback even in Egypt. And the Egyptians are questioning, saying that he is trying to rewrite history and to portray the current day Egyptians as colonizers who stole the culture from the African people. Well, that's interesting. So let's start with that, Yusuf and Yoji. That's the challenge of Afrocentrism everywhere in the world. As we say who we are, define ourselves, the world wants to push back with its story, and its story often is a story that justifies its exploitation and extraction of African people's lives, culture, genius, and everything. So, gentlemen, what do you think? What's your thoughts? Yusuf, I'm going to come to you first.
Well, bless Kevin's poor little heart. It seems like if it wasn't for bad luck, he wouldn't have any luck at all. A couple of comments, Al. First, Kevin is not a political scientist or a critical analyst to begin with. He's a stand-up comedian. And I believe that Dave Chappelle set the mantle pretty high in terms of political commentary. And so a lot of other comedians are following that stream. Now, apart from that, or who Kevin Hart is, he is correct, okay, because the documentation of Africans being part of the original lineage of the leaders of Egypt is too thoroughly documented to debate, going all the way back to when Egypt was referred to as Temeri. Mm-hmm. And one only has to go on by Dr. John Henrik Clark, Dr. Yosef Ben Jochanan, Dr. Ivan van Sertima, or the other African-American historians to really learn more about this in detail. It is indeed a shame that the Egyptians themselves are trying to paint this as some type of carpetbagger type takeover, where we're suggesting that the Arabs came in and stole African culture and leadership. But the fact that the kings and queens, the people who built the pyramids, going back to 16,000 BC, were African people.
Hmm.
As I said, it's too thoroughly documented to debate, and it's all the more reason why African people throughout the diaspora, including African Americans, need to have a thorough and accurate understanding of our history, because we used to say in the African name changing ceremony, the outdooring ceremony, that your name not only points out who you are, it identifies your place in history. Okay. And so our place in history as the original people, going back 4.5, 5 million years, were Black people. Okay. And all of the other races on this planet descended from African people. All of the other settlements and migrations came out of Africa and then went north and east, went into Europe, eventually came to this hemisphere, went to the southern hemisphere, but civilization began in Africa. Okay. And as Mahmoud El Khatib frequently says, we're all African people, more or less. Okay. So Kevin Hart, absolutely correct, made a fundamentally sound statement, although he's not a historian or, as I said, a political scientist, and he's catching hell for it. But that does not take away from the accuracy or the significance of the remarks that he made. Okay. It
And I
doesn't
think,
matter who makes the comments. If they're true,
yeah,
truth it is.
well, I think it's also wonderful, Yusef, that it moves the discussion into the broadness of the community, into the realm of not being an academic consideration or discussion, but a dinner table discussion. What is this? Why is it? What did happen? What do they mean? And why is there pushback to the statement we've simply only become to learn to know and feel, and that is that we have antiquity in our DNA, and that we are the owners, the parents on the planet. Yoji, good afternoon, brother. How you doing there in Bahia, South America? I want you to weigh in on this comment too, because it's the same discussion that goes on all over throughout the diaspora, the one of identity
Yes.
and whose story is the one that will be the prevailing story.
Okay, okay. Yes. I'm doing here is warm in Salvador. It's kind of the approaching the end of the summer, but still warm. So, this is interesting because it's something that I I always thought about, and I have an opinion that is divergent of the mainstream opinion. So I feel in this way, this is another kind of example how I, as a neo-African, right, African from the diaspora, but from Brazil, not from the United States. I see many times to ethnocentrism, where how is African American interprets their blackness has to become the only one. So you mentioned DNA. I did my DNA, and I would bring a challenge to most of my brothers and sisters to do a DNA test and see how much of their DNA comes from North Africa or from the Maghreb. I think, you know, very little. So I myself I think this connection and this embracement of Egypt so far-fetched, where it skips really the richness of our heritage. That is West African. It is in the Igbo people. It is in the Yoruba people. It is in the Hausa people. It is in the Fulani people. That what we brought to America, and that what has kept us alive is that information. So the Egypt, yes, we come from, Yoruba people came from the basin of the river Congo, where is Nubia, and there is this connection. But also, I think it is always I thought that is why so much in the Egypt because, Egypt they are never been, even where there was less Berbers, not so much Arabs, you know, they're not being dark skinned as us. So there is true Africans. And Egypt has been historically connected to the culture and to the commerce of the Mediterranean. And that it was not seen as we see today things about how we are race, black and white, and countries and regions. So I am a very proud descendant of people from West Africa. And my curiosity is to search more and know more about them. Egypt, it is a curiosity for me in certain way, but my strength it is in West Africa. So if I was Egyptian, for example, uh, not understanding the synergies of American culture and stuff, I would also not feel so offended that they are or giving a pushback,
So,
right?
Yusuf, let
Because
me have you jump
clearly
back in.
North Africans don't like dark skinned blacks. You know, is what's happening in Tunisia right now, for example,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
Yoji, I would respectfully beg to differ with you only on one point. Scientifically, DNA only registers where your ancestors were at a particular point in time, not for all time. Okay? And I'm suggesting that the original inhabitants of civilization were African people, and their original homeland was the continent of Africa. Okay?
Not
And that
The
Egypt
questioning
is
that.
Jewish
in the
people,
continent of Africa.
Yeah, it
yeah,
is happening that is in Africa.
the Jewish people talk about being enslaved within Egypt by the Egyptians, by King Pharaoh, and so on and so forth. 90% of the people who practice the Jewish religion look like the three of us. Okay, they're called Oriental Jews,
Well,
the
the
Jews
present
of color.
Egyptian culture is descendant of the Mamelukes. That's
So what
also
I'm
there are
what I'm
slaves.
saying is that the Jews who were enslaved in Egypt when the construction of the pyramids were black Jews. Okay, and Anwar Sadat said, the former president premier of Egypt, that there would never be peace in the Middle East because when the Jews left, they were black. When they came back, they were white. Okay, and only 10% of the Jewish people on the planet today are Caucasians. Okay, so again,
No,
it goes back to my point that the birth of civilization was in Africa, and
I'm
our
not questioning
original.
that at all.
Okay.
But I'm talking about me, part of this larger African diaspora. There is what 30 million people in the U.S., a few million in the Caribbean as well. You know, 110 million here in Brazil. There is all
Mhm.
the descendant of people who were enslaved in the last 500, 600
Black people.
years. It's
You're
us.
freezing up on us,
Of
brother.
okay, sorry.
Yeah. No, no problem.
The
No problem. I don't think
the
we're disagreeing fundamentally.
yeah.
I'm saying that there have been a number of people who have occupied the country that today is recognized as Egypt. And we want to go back to 1884, the Berlin Conference, when the Europeans created the the 54 piece puzzle that we now see as the geographic boundaries of the countries in Africa today. Okay, 54 independent nations, including
They are
Egypt.
partially dominated by the Turks, the Ottomans, you
And
know.
I'm saying that 1884, the Berlin Conference, is where
Hmm.
they carved Egypt up and said, you get from the mountains to the river, you get from the palm trees to the desert, you get from this coast to here and there, and so on and so forth. And African people did not have a lot to do with that. Now, the real history and the real significance of Egypt, if you look at its founding and its ascendancy to one of the leading countries on the planet at that point in time, is that they were able to collaborate and to draw and collect from multiple cultures. Okay, and that is how Egyptian civilization rose to rule that part of the world by drawing on the strength of the cultures of all of the surrounding peoples and countries and regions within Northern Africa. Okay, So Egypt has always been a collection point. All right. It has always been a collaborator with surrounding countries, drawing from those cultures,
But
those
you're
languages, and those
right, and
histories.
I'm not questioning that. What I'm questioning is, what are you saying is historically we can go back 5,000 years. Egypt, it is uh, in the same place that it is today, and and there is the desert of
but
Sahara
but
in the
not
same place there is today, and
but
then there
not
is us.
necessarily with the same inhabitants.
Well, no, no, I understand. No, that's what I say. The Egypt has been under the Ottoman Empire until the English came over, and this Ottoman Empire were the Mamelukes that who ruled Egypt. They were in certain way also slaves, right? The Mamelukes were slaves.
Hmm.
So they are there for that culture, what, 1,000 years? And then what I think is me, an African Brazilian, or me, an African American, all of a sudden, I start to claim this culture that is 5,000 years ago because the Orishas has as far length back as Egypt. And I know that I am descendant from West African. So I don't feel affinity with Egypt because I am not a Muslim.
Yeah.
I don't speak Arabic. I am not
I
Arab.
don't think, Yoji, I don't think it means you have to identify with the current
No, no.
inhabitants of Egypt. It's a question of acknowledging the centrality of our own culture and our own peoplehood in that space as the place
But,
where civilization itself and humanity began, with
but this
ourselves
I
at
think
the
is
center of it.
because of a reaction of the preponderant position that Egypt is given in the European culture,
Mhm.
where they
Well,
try to
Napoleon, when
usurpate it.
Napoleon
So
got to Egypt, he looked at the statue of the Sphinx of Giza. And he said, "How old is that statue?" And his people said, "It's only about 6,000 years old." He said, "Look, we can't have a statue with a black man's face on it that is older than the European civilization." And he brought the cannons out and fired them against the face of the Sphinx of Giza to deface him so it would no longer look like a black man, in a lion's body on top of the Sphinx of Giza. Okay? That's what
but
Napoleon did
yes,
when he got there.
but
When Napoleon got to Egypt, the first thing he did was line up all of the priests and the people in the temples. He raided all the libraries. He executed all of the historians and all of the academic people to
Destroy the
destroy
memory.
any semblance. And the history of Egypt is now located
yes,
in the United
yes, yes.
Kingdom, in the Louvre, in Germany, in France, all over
Yes,
Europe
but I am
because they
interested in the
looted.
University of Timbuktu. I am
Yeah,
interested in the Dogon. These are, again, who I
sure.
feel that I have a
Let me
Timbuktu.
jump
direct
in, guys. Let me
link
jump in
to
because
them.
this is a great conversation. I'm loving
Yeah,
it, but we got to
Yeah,
keep
you
moving.
know,
And I think this is one we'll keep coming back to because it's about
yeah.
identity, about who we are in the world, who we are among ourselves, and where we see our own beginnings. And I differ with you as well, Yoji. I know that my DNA places me as 99% Yoruba in my matrilineal line, but even within that, there's a story of where and how the Yoruba see themselves. What's the Yoruba origin story, and where did they come from? And that comes out of the same place, out of the Egyptian area. So
Nubia.
yeah, yeah. So let's keep moving. Let me do this. Let's go to topic number 2
Good,
on
good
today's program.
conversation. Thank you, Yoji. Um, to be
I know it's
continued.
not
And
popular,
we
my
have to have this
position.
conversation.
No,
Topic
no,
number
no.
2.
No, you're entitled to
Topic
your position, brother. Okay,
topic
we
number
love you
2,
for it.
guys, is about Tennessee State University. And I don't know if you've been following it. I'm not deeply into it, but it's important because it's about the fate of all of the HBCUs. There's a story by Adam Friedman from the Tennessee Lookout that says there's a report that's been released that calls for aggressive changes at Tennessee State University in response to student housing and scholarship problems. And that report lays those problems in part at the feet of the configuration of the board of directors at the university.
And the president.
The story says the state controller released a special report on Tennessee State University recommending lawmakers vacate and restructure the school's board of trustees and hire new administrators. The controller's audit revealed some valid concerns that must be addressed, but the historical precedent and context that brought us to this point matters, said Senator Charlene Oliver, a Democrat from Nashville. And she said this in a statement. She said the audit omitted the critical responsibility of the legislature to adequately fund the institution, which is a direct result of the situation that the institution finds itself in today. The report recommended an ad hoc committee, but it got a strong pushback from this institution's leadership and high interest from the students and parents. A lot of people involved. So, Yusuf, why don't you jump in? What are the flashpoints in this discussion at Tennessee State University, but how that applies to all of our historically Black colleges and universities?
Power and control, Al. That's the bottom line. Power and control. And Tennessee State is called Tennessee State because in part they receive state funding. And they set aside $25 million for scholarships, which increased their enrollment from an average of 2,000 to 5,000, but they did not have the capacity to provide housing for 5,000 students on the campus. And the state is now questioning whether that $25 million allocation for scholarship funding was indeed a legitimate expenditure, okay? Or if part of it could be used to build additional housing supply for the increased enrollment of students. Now, Tennessee has a board that is appointed by the governor and state government that oversees all of the two-year colleges, the junior and community colleges in the state of Tennessee. And they want to put Tennessee State University under the control of this board that controls and provides funding for all of the junior and community colleges in the state, number one. Number two, they want to dissolve the current board of trustees of Tennessee State and the administration so that it comes fully under the control of the governor and the state government in terms of who they appoint and who controls the two-year colleges. And Tennessee State would be the only four-year institution under the auspices of this state board of higher education, comparable to what we have, the Minnesota State College system, is what they have in Tennessee. Now, how does this relate to all of the HBCUs? It is too thoroughly documented to debate that historically Black colleges and universities have been underfunded almost to the point of self-immolation, okay, self-death by state governments, by other governing bodies who allocate higher education dollars. And up until a few years ago, half of the Black college graduates in the United States came out of historically Black colleges and universities. And as we look back at the Thurgood Marshalls, at the Charles Hamilton Houstons, at the Pauli Murrays, at the other significant individuals, not just in civil rights, but in leadership, in politics, education, economics, and culture, have all come out of historically Black colleges and universities. We can look at our own community. Mabel Cason worked in human relations for the St. Paul Public Schools, and she used to travel to all of these Divine Nine fraternity and sorority national meetings and national Black college meetings, and she had to hire two cabs, one for her and her luggage, the other one for all of her hat boxes, okay? Because she would attend all of the social events and recruit people to come to St. Paul. She'd find them a place to stay, a place to worship, a place to party, and a place to work, St. Paul Public Schools. And that's how most of the Black teachers got employed in St. Paul Public Schools as a result of the work of this one Black woman, Mabel Cason. Because of this attack on alleged critical race theory, on wokeness, whatever in the hell wokeness is, I define critical race theory as any discussion about race other than white supremacy. Okay, it's not allowed. All right, that's That's how the people who are trying to destroy Black education, Black history, and in advanced placement classes, any mention of race or the accurate and true history of this country as it relates to slavery and the oppression of Black people and indigenous and other communities of color. So this is sort of the wedge that they're trying to drive into Tennessee State University, which could then be used to seize control of the Howards, of the Gramblings, of the Florida A&Ms, the Atlanta AU complex with 8 different colleges, where the white power state government structure could seize control of those schools, could seize control of the curriculum, could seize control of the future of the Black community, because that's where much and or most of our leadership has come from, traditionally Black colleges and universities. So this is an attempt to sort of crack the door open to seize control of these historically Black independent colleges and universities across the country. And we need to pay very close attention to it and provide support. And hopefully Ben Crump and others will leap to the aid of Tennessee State University and forestall this attack that is about brutal power and control over the history of Black higher education. That's
and
it.
the danger is exacerbated by the stuff happening with the governor of Florida, right?
Yeah, Ron
attempting
DeSantis.
to dismantle and destroy any discussion about Black history that doesn't fit his idea.
And it has implications far outside the borders of Florida. Okay. It's being replicated across the country. And what's this group that they go by their initials and they send out proposed conservative legislation to all city and county Republicans and state Republican legislators? ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, is now picking up on this and bootlegging it around the country to encourage other elected conservative politicians to wage that fight in local communities and in state legislatures.
As you've described this, Yusef, it's not dissimilar to the experience that Black public schools had when we succeeded, quote unquote, in integration or desegregation after the Brown decision. And the unintended consequence was the elimination of Black teachers in the public school system, because the schools that we had and controlled that were created to serve our families were basically abolished with integration, and the teachers were not hired. So we lost both revenue and position to do the community and culture building work that teaching is about, when we found ourselves dismantling one other challenge, and that's the so-called separate but equal, that wasn't equal in terms of the distribution of resources for education for our families. So this is not dissimilar to that. It's at the higher education level, I think. What do you think?
It did have an impact, Al, but at the same time, Thurgood Marshall, who championed Brown v. Board of Education, also filed state lawsuits around the country to ensure that Black public school employees receive the same wages as their white counterparts, because the white schools were only given, pennies on the dollar in comparison to what the white public schools were receiving. And the principal inequity was in the salary of the educators. And the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund won every single one of those lawsuits to get Black teachers to be paid the same as white teachers without regard for what schools they were teaching in. Furthermore, they also used the Plessy v. Ferguson Supreme Court decision that said separate is okay as long as it's equal, to force white law schools. The University of Maryland refused to allow a Black law student to enter and said, you can go to Howard University, it's only 45 minutes away on the train. And Thurgood Marshall took that case to court and said, there is no Black law school in the state of Maryland, So the University of Maryland is either going to have to build one and fund it equal to what they're paying the University of Maryland, what that costs, or they're going to have to open up admission to Black students at the University of Maryland Law School. And of course, given the financial disincentives of creating a parallel track for Black law school students, Maryland elected to integrate the University of Maryland Law Schools. So in many instances, it not only provided parity in terms of salary for Black educators, because 50% of Black women up until the late 1950s, early 1960s, either went to work for public school systems or in government and nonprofit organizations, because those were the only large institutions that had significant hiring capacity to which Black women were allowed to participate. So a lot of the Black teachers who were in the Black public schools did wind up getting teaching positions in the white public schools. Integration did have an impact. And here's the key. In the 1950s, Black students only made up about 15 to 20% of the white schools into which they integrated. Today, they make up damn near 80% in all of the major metropolitan areas around the country.
Yep.
So there were a handful of Black students who were scattered around the white schools. And one of our local Black superintendents in the Twin Cities even said, integration is going to continue to be, desegregation is going to continue to be a problem until we can spread the problem around to the suburbs. And that person was defining the problem as who? As your and my children. Okay. Black kids were the problem. And they used to say the solution to pollution is dilution. Okay. Meaning let's spread them around so they don't have a significant impact or controlling force in any realm, whether it's real estate or education or politics,
Business,
economics,
anything.
and culture.
Yeah.
We see it in gerrymandering. We see it in education. We see it in home mortgages. We see it in healthcare. We see it across the board, okay, where a few Black people get their foot in the door and gain access to the resources, and the bulk are in the PJs, in the projects, okay, are in poverty and are trapped in a cycle that repeats itself across generations that doesn't offer a lot of hope or access to opportunity, that we need to go after in an institutional or systemic fashion to really have an impact. So it had an impact, but there were also counterbalances that were occurring in the litigation arena that I think countered some of that impact that occurred as a result of Brown v. Board of Education. And
let me ask Yoji to weigh in here. How does this question of power in education appear in Bahia in Brazil? The population there, majority African American, but the power, as I understand it, not. And so, where are we able to clearly look at interest and the marginalization and oppression of participation, the prevention of participation and marginalization of communities, and the control for the purpose of an elite, typically European, even in Brazil, are Eurocentric, Euro identifying. How does it look, Yoji?
Well, sometimes it's difficult to not compare, but I will try not. So to me, as I look now, after so many years outside of Brazil, the education and the access has improved. The infrastructure of the schools has improved. The curriculum and the approach. And the interesting is that became more and more similar to the American model of education. Here, notoriously, public education is education of low quality, where anybody who has any means, you send your kids to private school. So what I'm saying is that the public education has improved greatly, you know, but still in general the outcome of education, it's almost people are educated to a functional level. So as far African American identity and culture and being in the curriculum, in Brazil the difference is that we are majority of the population, our presence are overwhelmed. So there is a few years ago there was a law to include in the curriculum teaching of Afro-Brazilian or African history. It's enforced, not with efficiency everywhere, but there is this intention, and at the same time, there is the neglect. There is not yet this resistance that is happening in the United States now. That is one of the iterations of white supremacism. Is this resistance about critical race theory, this militancy also in the realm of education. In Brazil, it's still not because in certain way the Eurocentric part of the culture they don't care about public education because it's relegated to you know to those that are they can send their kids to private schools
Sure.
and to university in the US. So they don't have much of debate on public schools policy.
Let me shift the pivot a little bit more, but stick with Brazil. Yoji, when you and I talked a couple of days ago, you told me that the breaking news, and you've written a story that'll be available on Insight's website, I think later today. The breaking news was that some 100 or 200 people had been liberated from being enslaved. And what I've done to segue into this last hot topic today is pull up a story by Daniel Stewart. It was a February 11th story. And Daniel Stewart, I think this is a CBS story. I think that's a source of it. If not, I'll find that later on. The source of the story is Europa Press. Synopsis is that when he wrote this on February 11th, it said Brazil's Ministry of Labor and Employment has reported the rescue of 24 Venezuelan workers who were being held in slave-like conditions in the state of Santa Catarina in southern Brazil. The workers were even holding 2 newborn babies. The workers were in quote unquote degrading conditions in construction, and they were housed in industrial buildings in Chapecó and Itaparanga, according to an official statement from the ministry. And the way it works is that they'd offer a job to Venezuelans, a salary of a certain amount per month, either euros or in local currencies, and that people travel, but when they get there, they are placed in improvised dwellings without beds, without bathrooms, and or maybe living on the construction site itself. And so that's a problem. Then you sort of talked about that in our conversation a day or so ago, Yoji, that also in more recent days, the press is reporting that another 100 or 200 people have been released from being actually enslaved. What's the story? What's going on?
Yes, the exact number was 207, and being I think 128 from the state of Bahia. That is where I'm speaking from now. So it's the northeast of Brazil. So it is. I think if you remember, I've been talking to you how I've been surprised how recurrent is the cases of people being freed from slavery here in Brazil and from domestic slavery. 3 or 4 ladies in the last 6 months, ladies with 70 years old that has been, in this situation for over 50 years, working in the household of families. And also there is these cases of industrial slavery in many cases in the agro industry. So the south of Brazil is a area that is highly European. That's a place with a lot of immigrants from Germany, Italy, Poland. All these countries came to Brazil in the beginning of the 20th century, and they were given, and they were also took in as a replacement after the abolishment of the slavery, and they were given a lot of advantages to immigrate and to flourish. And then many of those today are owners of the agro industries. And the people who also are deforesting the Amazon are the same kind of people. But anyway, so and they hire people to work similar like they do in the US, right? In the seasons they hire Mexicans, and and that kind of situation happened with Cesar Chavez a few decades ago. And in Brazil, things are still going on. But tinted as it is nowadays, with this polarization because of politics, these people are supporters of Bolsonaro, and with this latent racism that is in Brazil, and particularly in the states of the south of Brazil. If you go in Rio Grande do Sul, Santa Catarina, uh, Paraná, it's like you are in Europe. The constructions are different. They are European. The cities are organized in a European way, and most of the people look European.
Hmm.
You know, so and there is a town that's Polish people, and the construction are from Poland, from the beginning of 20th century. There's Germans, there's Pomeranians, all these different flavors, Ukrainians, Russians. There is this peculiarity, oddities in Brazil as well. There is a city of Confederates. I don't know if you guys have heard about that. There's
Hmm.
two cities in the state of São Paulo. One is called Americana, and the other it's
Oh,
but has a
we
saint name. So in Brazil, slavery is up and down, and things got worse when the city council of that city came out and gave a speech in the chamber of the city, defending and saying that people from Bahia, the only thing they know, the culture that they have is to play drums on the beach, and that we are dirty, that they're gonna start hiring Argentinian workers because they're clean, they organize the house, and they thank you when they are paid, and so that created such repercussion. He got expelled from his political party. Now he's going to be investigated through the several prosecutors from the states, from the federal government. The governor from Bahia too did a strong. He created a great pushback to his
let me ask you
speech.
then, when the stories break about people that are enslaved, what does that do to the public consciousness in Bahia and in Brazil? Do people accept that and say, "Oh well, it's okay," or slavery isn't so bad, or do they call it another name, though,
No, that
or
here the
do they
local people is
justify
like,
it?
we knew. It's like they acted. We knew. We know. You know.
I mean, people are actually physically restrained and actually, as I understand it, beaten, punished, and coerced into staying in bondage or in servitude. Is that correct?
No, those cases, they are in many cases they are beaten, and this those 200 workers they are given electrical shocks
Mm.
and beatings, and they're
So
We lost
we're
him.
yeah, we're losing. So we only got about 2 more minutes for this segment, but Yusuf, jump in. Maybe Yoji will be back in a second.
Well,
Uh,
one of the things that besets African Americans is that we believe that all of the slaves came to the United States or came to the Caribbean, when in fact 85% of the Africans who were enslaved were shipped to Brazil. There was a
mhm.
process called seasoning where they would enslave Africans under the most inhumane conditions for years before they would ship them to the United States. And there was a policy in this country where no more than 2 slaves could be purchased off of a single ship. So that would prevent people from organizing, from working together to try and fight for their freedom and their independence. And people didn't worship the same gods, pray in the same direction. And it created a lot of chaos and disunity that some of which still exists today in our community. Brazil, as in any other country, Carter G. Woodson said, when you control a man's thinking, you don't have to worry about his actions, okay? You don't have to tell him to go to the back door. He will go without being told. And in fact, if there is no back door, he will cut one for his own special benefit because his education makes it necessary. So he was absolutely correct. This notion of public education is who defines it, who controls it. It's the Tennessee State story. It's the St. Paul and Minneapolis Public School story. It's the critical race theory, woke story in Florida, Ron DeSantis, and around the rest of the country. Donald Trump is making the key plank in his platform for re-election what he calls parents' rights. And he believes that parents whose students attend a school ought to have the right to hire and fire the principal and the Board of Education. So this thing is just going to get heated up through 2024 and the U.S. presidential elections. We're going to be hearing about this on an ongoing basis.
Running out of time, I'm going to spend a minute, Yusef, talking about Wayne Shorter, one of the giants in culture.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Wayne Shorter was part of the second quintet that Miles Davis put together. He originally starred in Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers on tenor saxophone and soprano saxophone, playing next to Lee Morgan, who was a brilliant trumpeter. And Miles Davis indicated publicly that between Wayne Shorter and Gil Evans, that they were responsible for the majority of the compositions that became signature Miles Davis hits. And Wayne Shorter also had several decade-long partnership with Herbie Hancock, and they contributed compositions for one another. And then he created Weather Report, which was a significant avant-garde jazz group from the 1960s for about 15 years. So Wayne Shorter, coming out of the bebop movement, born in 1933, and trained in composition, graduating with degrees in music composition, was a significant contributor to America's one true great form, jazz music. And on the soprano and tenor saxophones, he was among the leaders in the field. Absolutely.
Yusef, thank you so much. And Yoji, thank you. I'm going to say goodbye to you guys to use that as a segue to the last part of the program. Thank you so much. I want to bring in, and this is really a nice segue because we're talking about art and culture. And W.D. Foster Graham is Insight News's book review editor. He's an author and a promoter of books and of Black books. And we want to use this platform to encourage our people to know and experience the joy of picking up a book, buying a book, the touch, the feel, the pride you get in owning and creating your own library. So WD has invited an author today that we'll introduce to you. He's originally from Detroit. Fredrick Smith is a graduate of the Missouri School of Journalism of Loyola University, Chicago, and Loyola Marymount University. He lives in San Francisco. He's the author of 5 novels that center on the lives of Black and Latinx queer characters. The books include Busy, Ain't the Half of It. He's got a co-author, Chaz Lamar Cruz, a book entitled In Case You Forgot, again co-authored with Chaz Lamar Cruz, a book, Play It Forward, Right Side of the Wrong Bed, and Down for Whatever. Brother Fredrick Smith, good afternoon. Welcome to the conversation. And bring in W.D. Foster Graham as well, because we want to have a conversation. Introduce yourself differently from what I have already, Fredrick.
Hi, everyone, and great show, great conversation. I'm Fredrick Smith. I use he, him pronouns. As you shared, I do live in San Francisco currently, and I work in higher ed by day, higher education, but by night I write romance novels that center Black and Latinx queer characters.
Okay, and Frederick, not Frederick, but WD, thank you for bringing this author and this book to our attention. There's a whole world of information that we simply need to tell each other and show each other. And so why did you select this book for this series?
The reason I selected it because for far too long, when you talk about Black authors and poets, authors who stand at the intersectionality of Black and LGBT are absent from the picture. And then when I read Frederick's novel, I was very impressed because it reminded us not only that you have Black and LGBT people everywhere, but you look at the different cultures around the US. So, like, what happens with the Black community in Los Angeles or California is different. It has different milieus than it would be, say, in New York or Atlanta or DC or Chicago. So I've been a follower of Fred on Twitter. And after I read it, I couldn't put it down. I was just so impressed with this brother.
Well, Fred, give us the synopsis of Busy Ain't the Half of It. Entice people to want to go out and buy a copy. We want to encourage book sales for you.
Thank you so much. So it's a contemporary male second chance friends to lover romance novel. It's set in LA and it has elements of family, found family. It has some savvy teenagers in it, and also what's been deemed Black excellence. And it follows two main characters, Elijah Golden and Justin Monroe, who are a nephew and an uncle living in Los Angeles, who are seeking their happily ever afters, and they wonder if they're too busy to get it. One of the main characters, Elijah, is an inspiring actor who auditions by day, works multiple jobs by night and on weekend, and is trying to keep his relationship with a character named Zaire coasting on bliss. While Justin, who is the uncle, is a single father with teenage twins, a TV journalist, and who's recently been replaced at the anchor desk at his station in Los Angeles. And now that he's no longer in the public eye, he's able to live his true sexuality and identity, and especially after his long-term wife, has left him for a partner as well. So that is a little bit about Busy Ain't the Half of It. Like all true romance novels, there is a happily ever after and a happily for now. And it's published on Bold Strokes Books. And this novel wouldn't have been possible without my co-writing partner, Chaz Lamar Cruz, who's based in Los Angeles. And at the time, I was based in Los Angeles as well when we were writing the novel together.
What's the market like for stories that deal with the GLBTQ community?
You know what? Actually, it's booming and it's huge and it's growing. And when you go to some of the larger mainstream bookstores and independent bookstores, you'll find a lot of LGBTQ plus focused novels front and center at the opening tables when you walk into the stores. On many book talk and websites, you'll find many of these books front and center as well. I think what's interesting is that one of the things that we talk about in the writing community is that many stories in particular about male-male relationship romance novels are often written by straight women and straight white women. And that's really interesting in terms of, seeing.
So you're saying Black male stories by white women, or just male in general?
Male in general. And so, yeah, there's many novels that, my writer friends and I, have seen, heard of, and we're like, oh, it's written by a woman. That's really interesting. That's really cool. But I think in terms of, the Black male romance novel category, there's so many writers out there. From Rashid Darden, who's a writer based on the East Coast. There's a Brian Banks. There's a new writer named Aaron K. Foley, who wrote a novel called Boys Come First, and it's set in Detroit. And it's about three Black gay male characters looking for love in all the wrong places. And so there is definitely a market for all of us. And I'm just happy to be one of many who are part of this, contributing to the canon.
Is the culture in the Black community changing in any way that's describable or discernible? Is there more acceptance, or is there simply a realization that the topics we're talking about are topics we've always dealt with in our families and our communities, but never in a way that is public, the way that maybe is emerging right now? What do you think?
I definitely think it's more of the latter. I think that in many of our communities, for generations, we've known that there have been queer people among us. Now, there might have been a time back in the day when it was more hush hush. We don't talk about that. You have to leave the family. But I think that, especially with Gen Z and with millennials, there's a whole lot more openness and acceptance, and a whole lot more kind of pushing back and speaking to power and saying, this is who I am. And I am going to invite you in to my life and show you who I am, rather than doing like the traditional coming out that many people had to do like in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And so I think it's a whole different spin and a whole different level of acceptance that people have now. And, and recently I've been seeing, I think on NBC News, they have like a queer channel on Twitter talking about, in terms of Gen Z, like almost 25, 26% of Gen Z identify as gender fluid, as gender queer, as fluid among the spectrum. And so I think that speaks to a lot more openness, acceptance, and people willing to kind of blur the boundaries in their lives and explore who they are before they really discover who they are.
W.D. Foster Graham, where do you see it going in terms of being avenues for the broadest expressions of the possibilities of human beings? Where does it go?
Well, I see it going at this. One thing I've always believed, when we change the narrative, we change the perception. And as more and more people speak their truth, and you see this in the generations that have following us, you're going to see that change. And change happens one person at a time, one-on-one conversations. And going back to my byline, is called sharing our stories. And as wordsmiths, we know how to share a story.
Well, we have to leave it there. I think we're out of time. This has been a great conversation. Thank you for leading this addition to the conversation. We will look forward to meeting more authors from around the country, around the world. And again, our intent here is simply to celebrate and to elevate the joy, the learning, the discovery that books can bring us. And we want to make it normal that we all have and invest in libraries, that libraries mean something to us, that they are one of the sources of our wealth, of our sense of identity. And we celebrate, therefore, writers like Fredrick Smith and you, W.D. Foster Graham, and others. And we encourage and invite others to discover their ability, their capability, their talents, their gifts to express, to tell a story. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.